Fourth of July in America has become a vestigial holiday. The conditions which initiated its celebration as a national holiday no longer exist today. Much like the human appendix, Independence Day in America simply doesn't correspond to any reality that exists in the modern day. The spirit and the values of the Americans who declared independence from the United Kingdom or from the British Empire on July 4th, 1776, are not shared by even a plurality of Americans today. Even the so-called patriots, self-described patriots, which most people on the left would not describe themselves as patriots. Although, well, I shouldn't say that, because they did during the Trump years, because they were trying to juxtaposition themselves against the Russophiles, in the Republican Party. But I don't want to get off on a tangent about Russiagate. But you know what I mean when I say somebody who really talks about how much they love America. They don't love the values of 1776. When they talk about how much they love America and the 4th of July, most of them love the state and worship what is left of Washington's credibility. They try and have an idealistic, they cling to an idealistic notion of what the U.S. government is and what the flag represents and all these things. But frankly, you cannot be loyal to the American government today and truly believe in the values of 1776. The current American regime traces its origins really back to World War II, not to the Revolutionary War of 1776. The American government has gone through many evolutions, and every time it strays further and further, of course, from that original idea and spirit. And of course, in terms of ethnicity, which I think is something that is very fluid as a concept in the United States, we have, of course, completely diverged from the founding generation. There are very few people in this country who can date or who can trace their heritage back to that era in the country. The United States population today is made up of people from who overwhelmingly are descended from folks who came to this country after the founding of 1776. The American stock is fundamentally different. Anglo-Saxon dominance over the United States was really disappeared in the early part of the 20th century and had been waning ever since the founding of the country. And so why do I say all this? Why do I think that we are so far removed from 4th of July to the point to where it really is an irrelevant holiday in the context of modern America? D-Day, I think, is probably a much more appropriate thing for people to celebrate, since that is much more representative of the modern American spirit. And I say that begrudgingly. I am someone who is, always been an admirer of the American Revolution. It's very rare, in my opinion, that revolutions turn out well. Normally, when you see a revolution, the revolutionaries are worse than whatever monsters they are overthrowing. But I think that what made the American Revolution different, and this is something that is completely anathema to modern Americans, is that the American revolutionaries of 1776 were, in their heart of hearts, fundamentally anti-state. They hated the state under which they lived, and even though they sought to create their own state, they didn't like the concept of the state. They were highly skeptical of the state, and they wanted to put every barrier possible between their personal liberties, between themselves, their property, and the claws of the state. And that simply is totally inconsistent with the attitudes of Americans, left or right, these days. Now, in certain areas, that isn't the case. People are skeptical of the government when it comes to certain aspects of life, but they do not fundamentally hate the state. And so therefore, people have to celebrate the more superficial aspects of 4th of July, namely, America's independence from the British Empire. Because their story kind of falls apart when they really get into the details of the weeds too much, and they say, well, gee, why was it such a good thing that the Americans achieved, declared independence from Great Britain? And said, oh, well, Britain had high taxes, and they didn't give, and the Americans weren't properly represented in Parliament. Oh, and the British, they had these general warrants where they'd go and they searched through everyone's records, and they were spying on people. And so obviously you look at that, and there was no tax levied by the British Empire which came anywhere close to the level of taxation we have in this country today. Some tax on tea that people don't even drink anymore, except for me. I drink tea. I drink tea every day. But then again, that tea drinking in the South is sort of a vestige of the South's relative loyalty to the crown compared to New England and in the far north. But that again is a topic for another video. I don't want to get off in the weeds about that. But suffice it to say, it's impossible for someone who is at all supportive of the modern American regime to honestly say that the level of taxation under the British in the 1770s was at all onerous. It would be a dream for me if we could just go back to the level of taxation that the British imposed on the American colonists in the 1770s. Now, with regard to the right to privacy and these general warrants and the British just being able to go around and go through people's papers and seize all their records and do whatever they wanted, well, we have the NSA, who does all that and much more effectively than the Redcoats ever could dream. And as far as representation goes, well, back during the Progressive era, the U.S. government capped the number of representatives in this country, and the result was that these congressional districts are so big and have so many people, so many hundreds of thousands of people in them, that your congressman is not really accountable to you or your community because you're all too small. And if your congressman does something that's really unpopular, well, he's got plenty of money to fight off any challengers who, from the community who might say, you know what, you don't represent us well anymore, I'm going to do a better job. There's a tremendous barrier to entry to getting into politics. And so therefore the U.S. Congress, I think, considering that Congress has, like a single-digit approval rating amongst Americans, I think that probably close to 90% of Americans would agree that Congress does not sufficiently represent their constituents, does not represent the American people. And so therefore, we're not much better off than we were in the pre-revolutionary times under Britain. Americans have no effective representation, and we are much more severely taxed than the American colonists ever were. And the NSA spies on us much more than the British ever could dream of doing back then. So by all specific metrics, and again, there was plenty of other reasons why people participated in the revolution. There were other issues, but those were some of the big ones that you hear a lot about, in a basic, cartoon retelling of the American Revolution that you would get in public school. That's what we're told the American Revolution was all about. That's what 4th of July is about. Well, by all those metrics, the modern American regime is far worse than the British Empire. And so it makes no sense to celebrate this holiday. It's just, it's pointless. What is there to celebrate? Anything that was achieved back in 1776 has been given up. Those gains um, have been given up times 10 or times 20, times 100, whatever. Things are much, much worse now in terms of government overreach. And so the only way that you could still celebrate today, honestly, unless you're looking at it purely as a historical event, you're saying, well, okay, well, this was one good thing, but I mean, you can't celebrate America as it is today on the 4th of July. I mean, it's borderline heretical. Obviously, this isn't a religious thing, but I mean, it's insulting. I think it's insulting to all the men who fought and died in the Revolutionary War, and all the men who risked, everything they had in signing the Declaration of Independence, to somehow equate what we have today with what they were trying to build, with the fruits of their labor. Modern America has no claim to the 4th of July. We have no right to celebrate it as our own holiday. The 4th of July is about as applicable and relevant to modern America as Canada Day is. And we don't celebrate Canada Day here because people understand that has nothing to do with our government or with our current political state of affairs. And so why do people celebrate 4th of July? Well, it's because they delude themselves into thinking that America is, this free, wonderful country that was set up by the Founding Fathers. And there are certain things that, that have been maintained, even though the right to bear arms has been severely weakened over time. It does still exist. There's far and away, there's nowhere else in the world where gun ownership is more prevalent and more accessible. And so that is something, I guess, to be proud of, that has been maintained, although it has been greatly eroded. But more fundamentally, what I think people are celebrating today is just sort of baseline or boilerplate jingoism. People are celebrating symbols like the flag, or platitudes like all men are created equal, or other some such nonsense that does not apply. They might be celebrating, machismo and the America's record at winning wars. Well, at least America's record of winning wars up through World War II and Korea, but since then, not a great track record. I guess what people do, what a good way of looking at this is on 4th of July, people project whatever their political values are onto the American Revolution. And they look at whatever is going on today. Like I think during the Iraq War you had a lot of this. People were very patriotic after 9/11 and at the start of the Iraq War. And so 4th of July 2003, probably, I don't remember 4th of July 2003, but people probably were more excited because of what was going on with the invasion of Iraq. And that made a lot of them feel more proud to be Americans. That somehow what was they were tying in their head what was going on in Iraq back to the American Revolution, and that somehow we were spreading the American Revolution to Iraq, even though the American Revolution here died out generations ago. But what people consider to be the American Revolution is kind of their own values, whatever it is that they believe, because I've said this before, the concept, the fallacy of the real America. There is no real America because, and this has always been the case, going all the way back to the founding of the country. There's always been a multitude of Americas across the country, or countries. There's never been any real sense of unity. Unity has always been a myth. It's just that wherever people lived or wherever they grew up, whatever their culture was, they thought of themselves as being the real American. When they saw other people, they thought, oh, well, you're weird. You're the exception, not the rule. I'm the rule. But in reality, there never was any rule. But the internet has made that fantasy impossible to maintain. People can no longer believe that they are, that there's a majority who is like them. and that when they meet other people who are different, who share radically different values, that those folks are just some weird fringe minority, because they encounter so many of them on the internet. And so therefore, just like the idea of the real America, the idea of Independence Day, which, of course, as I said, in reality is many, many different ideas, is going to be shattered as well. And I do not think that it will be widely celebrated for too many more years. People are already becoming disillusioned, and of course it's going to start on the left, because the left are the ones who fundamentally are the most okay with feeling anti-American. Although again, the resistance stuff created a weird pause in that sentiment on the left, to where they turned into, ultra jingoists. But anyway, when I start to see folks on the left, young people and such, begin to reject the founding fathers or the American Revolution and Independence Day and that very concept, I don't fret at that. It's not that I think that this new generation of kids are changing and all of a sudden they hate America. It's that those ideas most people have disagreed with for, again, many generations, and they're only now beginning to realize that the American Revolution does not belong to them. And that's why they're striking back. That's why they are trying to cancel the founding fathers. And to me, that's a good thing, because it allows those of us who actually are ideologically much closer to the founding generation, who are fundamentally anti-state, to reclaim these symbols as our own, and to distinguish ourselves from the masses who worship Washington. But then again, one of the good things is that with the realization of all these cultural divisions in America, far fewer people are willing to worship Washington. Washington is becoming more unpopular every day. So I guess in the end, Independence Day is becoming more divisive. But in doing so, I think that it's going to return to its roots, and so that's a good thing. We need less people celebrating Independence Day, because it's not for everyone. The values of the 4th of July should be preserved and embraced by those who truly appreciate them. So with that said, I will leave things there for today.